Your argument is essentially this: if God is not all of his attributes working all of the time, he's not God. Is that correct? Right. Then you have a problem as a Muslim. Do the words of the Quran, or the words of the Quran eternal? In other words, is the speech of Iblis that is recorded in the Quran eternal or not? The reason why you're struggling is because you're defending irrationality, and you're a rational human being. Your rationality is telling you that this is nonsense, but the fact that you're a Muslim is telling you that you have to defend it.
But by virtue of humanity, he can access less information and less more. So basically, by virtue of his humanity, can he forget that he's God?
He's the worst of nobody, Bob.
What's your name?
No, don't
Taser.
please.
Don't expect any respect from
You're the worst of nobody.
Yeah. We are going to have a conversation.
Yeah,
now.
I can speak wherever I want.
Me and Carl know each other from university, and he recommended to come to you regarding a few questions.
Okay.
We've been debating in university, he's Christian.
He's the worst of nobody.
So we used to debate in university. I'm Muslim and he's Christian, and we just started to chat and stuff. So just regarding, I have a question regarding this topic, God. You know, is glory an attribute of God? Or would you say?
Glory is something that we do to God.
Okay, because
it is an energy. It is an uncreated energy that begins in a moment of time when there are those to give glory to God.
Okay, so I was wondering, in terms of because the topic was on God entering creation.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, do you believe personally that God has to limit one of his attributes to enter creation?
No.
Because in the Bible, I think Jesus mentions that he doesn't know the time of the end.
Yes, that's correct.
But in that aspect, Jesus isn't all-knowing in that situation.
Yep.
So how is he not limiting the attribute of all-knowing?
Yeah. Okay.
In that
So when we talk about this, yeah, you stood right there, bro. You're choosing to stand.
I was talking to you. I was talking to him.
Stop whinging. I'm talking to you. So in terms of as if you're worried. So in terms of the Council of Chalcedon, what we say is that Christ has two natures in the one person.
Yeah.
These natures are not confused, they're not mingled, they're not changed.
Yeah.
They're not separated and they're not divided. Okay? So the attribute of the divine, the divine logos, takes on the fullness of humanity. Okay? That fullness of humanity is not confused, it's not commingled, it's not separate to, it's not divided from, but it does not change either. Okay? So when the logos becomes a man, becomes a full man, just like me and you, and we have conscious knowledge and unconscious knowledge. Knowledge of which we are consciously aware, and knowledge which is beyond our reach. It's there, but it is not accessible to our conscious mind. Agreed? That's how humans operate, right? And this question about the knowing the day nor the hour, falls into that category of knowledge that is present but not accessible. Now let me finish. Yeah, because it says in Scripture, it says in Luke that Christ grew in wisdom and knowledge before his parents. It says in the book of Acts that Christ came to reveal times and seasons. So that which was relevant to what he came to do in his earthly life is what was the accessible knowledge to him. As God, as pure God, he knows all of physics. But obviously, we Christians aren't going around saying Christ knew the theory of relativity 2,000 years ago.
So God the Son.
Do you absorb what I've said?
Somewhat.
I'm saying that knowledge that was not relevant to his earthly ministry is placed within his unconscious.
But it's not accessible, so that means he's not all-knowing, right? In the Son, in his form of being the Son.
Yeah, by virtue of his humanity. Yeah.
By virtue of his humanity. But in that phrase, he says, nor the Son, only the Father knows.
Yeah.
And the Son is fully God according to Christianity, right?
Correct.
So but how can he be fully God when he can't access knowledge?
Right. So what we've said is that Christ becomes fully man. Yeah? When Christ refers to himself as the Son multiple times in his earthly life, and he's talking about the fullness of himself. Okay, so it's not that we separate out this term just to refer to his divinity. It refers to his person, the one person of Christ.
And you're saying that's a dual thing. When he's saying the Son, he's not just
There's
talking about
one
God the Father, he's
person
talking about-
within two natures that operates through two natures. Those two natures operate. So that means that when Christ had a humanity, he had a conscious knowledge and an unconscious knowledge, just like every human being here does. Those things that were not relevant to his ministry on earth were not accessible to him. That doesn't mean that that knowledge has disappeared. It doesn't mean that that knowledge is not something present there with him. It just means that by virtue of his humanity is not accessible at that moment.
Because they don't know then. I will be lying then. They must say I don't want to tell you no.
Sorry,
That's different.
is it okay if I transition to the question that I had?
Yeah, of course.
So
You can.
it's kind of related to like God the Man and God the Son.
I just want to bring it out. Yeah. In the book of Acts, after the resurrection, yeah, the apostles asked Christ this. So when they had come together, they were asking him, saying, "Lord, is it at this time you are restoring the kingdom of Israel?" He said to them, "It is not for you to know times or epochs which the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Syria." So what it's saying is that that he hasn't come to reveal everything to them.
Sorry,
said I will fix it.
if God the Father can put restrictions on God the Son, that's it.
It's in that God the Father has placed restrictions on God the Son by virtue of his humanity.
By virtue of his humanity,
Yes.
But by virtue of humanity, he can access less information and less more. So basically, by virtue of his humanity, can he forget that he's God? Because humanity has the ability to forget.
Yeah.
And by virtue of his humanity, theoretically, he can forget that he's God himself.
By
So
virtue
that can mean that,
as a hypothetical question.
Yeah.
As a hypothetical question, I'm going to entertain it in all seriousness.
But so say that could possibly
forget?
mean that, like
I mean,
for example, Carl can be God.
It's a good hypothetical question.
Because that can mean Carl can be God. But for example, he's
Wait. Why can a car be God?
No, I'm talking about my friend. Sorry.
Oh, Carl.
Yeah. So he can hypothetically be God, but he's just forgotten the fact that he's God because he's limited by his humanity.
Well, this is a good hypothetical question, but we have to deal with what actually Christians believe about Jesus. We don't believe that Jesus forgot that he was God.
Yeah, but if the avenue is open there, like if the avenue of the ability to forget is open, yes, surely we can't just.
Or rather,
deny-
the attribute. This is not about forgetting, though. We're talking about something that is accessible. This is not about forgetting. This is about what is accessible.
It could also not be accessible, the knowledge of knowing that you're God, by virtue of your
Would you
humanity.
agree that humans can grow into knowledge?
Yeah.
That humans do grow into knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of Christ operating through his humanity, there has to be limits, right? There's a limited shape. There's a limited lifespan. You're born. You die. Christ is operating through his humanity. I mean, if you're a good human being, you pray to God. The Son prays to the Father, and he's operating through his humanity. He has to have limits of knowledge. So in terms of those limits of knowledge, we've got to be clear. It's not that that knowledge is not present. That knowledge is present in the person of Jesus. It is just not accessible by the virtue of his
I have a
humanity.
similar question, like from.
I'm not talking to him,
I
bro.
have a similar question. I'm asking.
Bro, he's just going to stop being rude if you let him into this conversation, and you will
Barry
lose
changed.
this
No, give me a
conversation.
good conversation. No, I'm not being rude.
You will be.
Give me a good.
He's demonstrated he's being
Give me a
rude.
good
Bro,
question.
I'm going to give you this
Why
choice.
is it?
You either, bro.
No,
You got a choice. You talk to me or you talk to him.
I'm
What do you want to do?
Is it possible that
Right,
the
so
man
we're
side?
going to talk. Carry on. What was your
Hold on.
point?
Is it possible that the man side didn't
Go
know
on,
that?
don't be intimidated by this guy.
Didn't know that the God
I told
side
you
know
not to let him
the.
In terms of this, so you're saying
Is it possible that the man side didn't know that the God side
I'm
know?
sorry, he's being rude. Speak up,
The
say
issue
again.
is like it's not accessible, right? The knowledge is there. The knowledge is there. The knowledge is there.
The knowledge is not
It's
accessible.
not accessible, right? But that can mean that God could be here right now because the knowledge is there, but it's not accessible to him.
Correct.
That he's God.
Yes.
So-
No, not that he's God. The knowledge is not there about
said God is
this
a man.
question because he wasn't
Oh,
sent
Zaya,
here to
numbers.
reveal this question.
All over the place.
He wasn't sent here to reveal the day or the hour. He was sent here for a purpose. And if you read the Gospels, the purpose is very clear. His purpose is to defeat sin and its effect on our lives. It is to free us from the fear of death. It is to conquer death itself, to destroy the powers of darkness over humanity, so that humanity can enter into the presence of God. That's his mission.
But do you not see it's quite worrying that this specific issue that you can't access knowledge, so there's like no limit to what you can't access?
I think one of
like a theoretical?
I think one of the issues that I have with your argument is it assumes that the defining characteristic, the defining nature or essence of God is knowledge.
But that is one of his defining aspects, like his defining features.
Now let's just think about this logically.
Sure.
So you're saying that because God, by virtue of his humanity, doesn't have access to all of his knowledge in his humanity, that therefore he's not God. Is that correct?
No, that therefore there's no limit to what you can't access. Because if you open that door that you can't access something.
Well, no. Those limits are set by himself.
Sure, yeah. But where is like?
No.
Where,
would you agree that what we can access as knowledge is set for us by God?
Yeah.
Right. So who's setting the limits on the knowledge that God can access by virtue of his humanity? Right. So this is something that he has control of, right?
Yeah.
So it sits under his authority, correct? Does it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay then. So if it sits under his authority, right? Your argument, and don't get me wrong, and correct me if I'm misquoting. Your argument is essentially this: if God is not all of his attributes working all of the time, he's not God. Is that correct? Right. Then you have a problem as a Muslim. You have a problem as a Muslim, right? So now you're going to see what Salafism looks like.
Shut your mouth.
So see what I mean?
So we are, yeah.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
So do you agree with his behavior?
The point is irrelevant.
Do you agree with his behavior?
No, it's different from me. I know
I'm
you.
asking you, do you agree with his behavior?
No, because it's different. You don't know you. I know you.
Do you agree with his behavior?
See, I say you're different from me because you don't know him. I know him. He's a rude guy, so he deserves rudeness.
It's too nice to comment.
Yes,
It's too nice to comment.
he's a rude guy.
It's too nice to comment. Do you think he's being rude?
Nice guy. Bobby's a nice
It's
guy.
passion. So when a Muslim is being
Bobby's
rude
a nice
to a
guy.
Christian, it's just
Bobby
passion.
coming a Christian cry out. I don't know what.
No.
I mean, like,
Shame on you,
I was here last.
Shame on you.
Go watch YouTube and see about following another. No, watch YouTube. You see this guy following another white Christian guy around, calling him a heretic.
Let's come back to.
He's not a nice guy, so I don't have to be nice to him.
Am I being nice to you? Right?
Yeah.
That's him. That's for him. It's fine, but I don't have to be nice to you.
I just had
So no, my point is to you, as a Muslim,
I'm not just when you go to temple.
you believe in the 99 attributes of
I get
Allah,
angry when
correct?
just go to temple.
One of those attributes is mercy, correct?
You know, just get angry to sometimes.
Can you give me an example of mercy that is not a
You just
transaction?
get angry sometimes. It's in the Bible. So,
okay.
Bob, you get angry, Bob. You should get
So there's an example in the Hadith where someone says that they want to access
I don't like when
heaven
he
through their
cries.
own
Like he's a
works.
nice guy.
I'm sorry?
They want to access heaven through their own
Insult
works.
people too.
So like
He's
through their own
Allah.
deeds, they want to access heaven. And
So
God
the Bible says
doesn't.
what
God,
Christ
like
teaches
basically,
the Bible.
no one can access heaven without
Same
God's
measurement.
mercy.
Be careful in measurement.
It's not dependent on
Judge
your
not.
works.
Let's not see
Sorry, I
judge.
can't hear you over this.
Same
You're too
measurement.
quiet and he's too loud. Bro, you're going to have to speak.
Go. Let's move on.
Let's move away.
No, but he's a Christian.
Go on, you were saying.
It was about in terms of like no one can enter heaven
Yeah.
based on their deeds alone. It has to be through God's mercy.
Yeah, so that's a transaction, right?
That's not a transaction.
Yeah, it is because it's between two parties. Allah is giving mercy to the believers.
Yeah.
So that's a transaction.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So before creation, who was Allah merciful to?
For creation. But he's like the ever creator. So.
Yeah. So creation is eternal.
No, sorry.
So creation is not eternal.
Yeah.
So who is he giving mercy to before creation?
In terms of like, I don't want to comment on something
My point is that within Islamic doctrine, you have the idea that the attributes of God are not in operation.
Are you saying like because there was no one?
Allah is merciful, right?
Yeah.
He's never
That's
telling
his
us
character. But he's not merciful until there's someone to be merciful to.
But surely the act of creating,
He's a mercy
like
act himself.
the intention he had of the act of creating is a mercy. Because
himself.
he's going to
But
provide
that's a
mercy
transaction. My point is before creation, who is he merciful to?
Who's merciful? Like,
Who was there to be merciful to before he created anything?
I mean, I don't want to comment.
Was he being merciful to himself?
I don't want to.
What did he do wrong to be merciful to?
The intent was there to create.
Right.
Allah always, the scholar says Allah
intent,
always
yeah,
create.
yeah.
Allah eternally create.
Yeah.
That's why it's created.
So do you believe that creation is eternal?
Not
So you're a
creation-
pantheist?
No. I wanted to, but surely like what I was mentioning before opens the door to pantheism in regards to like if God can't access knowledge.
So let me bring it back to the incarnation, because I'm not trying to run away from the topic.
Sure.
My point to you is that within Islamic Tawhid, within the doctrines of Islam about what you believe about Allah, you have the idea, nascent within your own beliefs, that the attributes of God are not always in operation. They are there, they are present in Allah. Allah is merciful, but his mercy is not in operation until he has something to be in operation too.
That's not true.
Now, within the incarnation, the knowledge of God is present, but it is not in operation.
When I'm telling lie and my religion, that's not our doctrine, that's lie.
You get that?
Allah mercy always active.
Next question.
Allah mercy always active.
In regarding, do you believe
Non-Muslim
God the Father and God the Son have the same will?
God the Father and God the Son have the same will. This is a question that I'm just starting to dig into.
Okay.
That's not part of my religion.
We believe as Christians that in the incarnation, Christ has two wills. A human will and a divine will. Okay? And that the divine will is always to do the will of the Father.
Okay. So,
and the human will that we see, like for instance in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he says, you know, Father, if it is your will, remove this cup from my hand, but not my will, but your will be done, is an example of the human will
with the Son's divine will. The human will.
No, it's not against. It's not against. The Church condemns that as a heresy. We don't teach that. The human will. The human will is conforming to the divine will, which is what a perfect human being should do. The perfect human being should conform their will to the divine will.
So I just wanted to, in terms of the Garden of Gethsemane, that is a conversation. I just want to clarify this for myself. That is a conversation between Jesus the human with Jesus the divine Son.
No,
not Jesus, not the divine Son with the Father.
No, so that is a discussion, because the thing is, your line of argument presupposes two persons there. We don't believe in two persons, we believe in one person.
Okay.
So Jesus is speaking to the Father.
Jesus as the God-man is speaking to the Father?
Yes, Jesus as the God-man is speaking to the Father.
I wasn't sure if it's...
and this conversation is operating out of the human will, because the human will has to, as it were, travel through human desires, human intentions, human fears, human anxieties, it's got to travel through all of that to get to wherever it's going. You've got to make a choice, but you make a choice through time and space and circumstance and, your own mind, your own fears, your own needs, your own desires. Me and you might want to talk to one another, but if one of us really needs the toilet, our will to stay here and talk has got to travel through that need. Do you know what I'm saying? So when Christ, the one person of Christ, is saying, Father, if it is your will, remove this cup from my hand, his human will is travelling through very human fears and very human anxieties about the upcoming crucifixion, to arrive at that perfect submission. It corresponds with and cooperates with the divine will, which is what every human being needs to do.
So it's not... Because I was thinking, like, this was my understanding of the passage before you mentioned this. My understanding was it was either God the Son speaking to God the Father, saying, if not my will, your will be done. That's incorrect.
Sorry, say that again.
It was God the Son speaking to God the Father, saying, if not my will, your will be done.
Yeah, it is God the Son. But you've got to remember, when we don't make a division between...
I'm separating the...
what we're saying is you don't.
Okay.
You don't confuse the natures. You don't mix the natures, you don't change the natures, but you don't separate the natures.
Because if you... Okay, yeah. Because I was thinking...
Because in the one person of Christ operates through both divine and human nature. So let me give you an example of what that looks like, particularly about death. Because obviously this is a big contention. How can Christ die if he's God? Yeah, it's a fair question. It is a fair question. It's just being mutilated by Muslims who don't understand Christian theology. We say that both the human and the divine nature pass through death. But the way that they respond, the way that it affects them, is different according to their nature. So, for example, if I get an iron rod and a wooden rod and chuck them both into a river, the iron rod will sink and the wooden rod will float over the river. They've both gone into the same thing, but they have behaved totally differently. One passes over the top and the other one sinks to the bottom. And so it is with the human and divine nature, death, and in many of these questions. The death affects the human nature, it kills it, but the divine nature passes through death unblemished, untouched, uncorrupted by it, unchanged by it.
Sorry, just in regards to like the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah.
The human nature, the God-human nature of Jesus is going against. Was originally against the will of the Father, right? In that specific
No,
situation.
not against.
Not against, but
It was never against.
Was not aligned with the will of the
No,
Father.
it was.
But then
No. You misunderstood me, so I'm going to try and break it down for you. It's not against. Yeah? He's asking a question. It's appropriate to ask God questions.
But he says, if not my will,
No.
your will be done. So, I mean,
Yeah.
they have a difference of wills.
No, hold on one second. No, that's not what that passage is saying. Shall we go to it? It's in Luke.
Sure.
Yeah, because the thing is, people always get stuck on that bit and they forget the bit that comes a bit later on.
Okay. Because I was thinking, I was just going to present my, what I was going to say. If that's okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
go
it
for
would
it.
have probably been attacking the wrong thing.
Sure, go on.
But
No, go on.
If the son's will is, if the human nature's son's will is against God the Father's will, it's kind of a human sacrifice in a way, because the human nature of Christ is being taken against his will by God the Father.
Right.
A bodily sacrifice.
Yeah.
So he's being sacrificed as a human sacrifice against his will.
So let's read it. And he came out and proceeded, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives. And the disciples who followed him, when he arrived at the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw. And he knelt down and began to pray, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Yeah? That is not stating what his will is. Because his will is, if you listen to that prayer, he's saying that my will is to do your will.
So what was the bit about remove the cup?
Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. So what is the will of the Son? To do the Father's will or not?
But why would he ask the question? Why would he entertain the possibility of removing the cup?
Because
if he has the same will.
Well, I will definitely answer that question.
Yeah, sure.
I am not going to avoid it.
Sure.
But would you agree with me that passage shows that the will of Jesus is to do the will of the Father? Because he's submitting to the Father's will. He's saying, "Your will be done."
Like eventual submission, like he wants an eventual aligning of wills, but in that specific case, like just predating that eventual aligning, there's a separation of wills.
I disagree, because this is a singular prayer, and it literally says, "Not my will, but yours be done."
So you're saying like, not my will?
Yeah,
yours.
yeah, exactly. Not my will, but yours be done. So what is the will of Jesus? To do the will of the Father. He's literally saying, "Not my will, but yours be done." So is it fair of me to say that the will of Jesus is to do the will of the Father?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, that's what's happening here. But now we come back to the point that you were talking about. His human will is still human, and it has to travel through the fullness of his humanity. And a human being facing death is going to be anxious, right?
Yeah.
A human being facing death is going to be having trepidation, right? So his human will has to traverse the fullness of his humanity. But it does, and it agrees with the divine will.
But in your interpretation, is there any? I think you mentioned earlier that there is a possibility of two wills.
We Christians definitely believe in two wills.
Two wills.
We absolutely believe in two wills. And the reason, and this is going to be some good reading for you to know more about our Christian faith, is read Maximus the Confessor. Maximus the Confessor was the church father who defended the idea of the two wills. Because it flows naturally that if Christ has a complete human nature, he must have a human will.
Yeah,
because if he doesn't have a human will, he doesn't have a human nature.
And through this human will, isn't it submitting to? I mean, that human will. It's the human will that's questioning the Father, right?
No, it's not. Yeah, it's asking the question.
Yeah. So it's the human will that's questioning the Father, and it's
the person of Christ questioning the Father through his human will.
Okay, let's take a one first. Okay, so the person, the Father questioning through his human will. Okay, but so the human will, like, wasn't Christ like tempted in the desert, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
By virtue of his humanity.
By virtue of his humanity.
You know that temptation is not a sin, right?
I mean,
being
it
tempted
depends.
No, being tempted is never a sin. Being tempted is not a sin. Acting on the temptation is a sin.
Okay.
We all know the difference between the suggestion and the action.
By being tempted, that's your will to be tempted, right?
No, like the imagination is a factory of thought. It produces thought because it's there for us to assess and make assessments of danger and assessments of opportunity. So the imagination will create thoughts in a very unconscious way, back to conscious and unconscious knowledge. Your imagination, you know and I know, because we all done it and he knows, our imagination will imagine things without us having any particular control over it. Agreed? You've sat there, you've not intentionally thought to yourself, I will now imagine X, but then you've imagined X for some reason. Agreed?
Yeah.
Right, that's an example of conscious and unconscious knowledge. Yeah, but that's also an example of the fact that your will is not necessarily in control of all the faculties of your mind in a conscious way. Yeah? So Christ, by his human will, by his human nature, is tempted by the devil.
But God the Father can't be tempted in the same manner, right?
God the Father never became a man, so no.
Yeah. So in that instance, there's a difference of like will. I mean, in that instance, there's.
Are you saying that the Father is different from the Son?
Yeah.
We believe that the Father is not the Son.
Potential conflict in that moment. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just my brief.
But let me come back to you because I go on. I'll let you ask more questions.
Sorry. It was just the last one on this one. It was just in regards to like if the human's will through like that situation he's in is not to be sacrificed, and if he's just like succumbing to.
No, hold on. It doesn't say that in the text. I'm sorry. I know.
No, it's fine.
But the text really doesn't say that. What the text demonstrates is that the will of Jesus is to do the Father's will. It is not showing that the will of Jesus isn't to go to the cross. Because it says, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. So the will of the Son, the will of Jesus Christ, is that the Father's will be accomplished. That's what that prayer is about. He's praying to accomplish the will of the Father. And that's fair to the text. Now, much more importantly for our conversation is how does a story about Jesus praying in the garden actually teach us anything? That's really when you start doing Bible study. When you go beyond these kind of silly, and you're not making them in a silly way, you're sincere, I get that. But lots of the Dawah team make them in a silly way. But is how do we then go beyond the simple text to applying it to our lives? Because what's that's demonstrating is firstly that a perfect human being is one who does the will of God before anything else. That should be our prayer. Not that our will should be done, but that God's will should be done. That should be the prayer of every Christian. That should be the prayer of every human being, to do God's will, right? But also what it shows is that we can lift before our Heavenly Father all of our anxieties, all of our stresses, all of our pressures, all of the things that we're struggling with, all of our worries, even our worries about the things that we know God is calling us to. Because we Christians believe in this idea of vocation, the idea of calling. But that doesn't come anxiety-free, trust me, I know, right? Anyone who's trying to follow a vocation will suffer anxiety. And we can lift our anxieties before the Father. And what it also means is that God is free to do with us what he wants to do, even if it means our death. We Christians must follow the will of God, even if by doing so we die. That is the level of submission that a Christian is called to. Now, in anything of the teaching points, is there any problem with those teaching points?
I mean, personally, I have a few issues, but I can understand. I understand the whole holistic view of it more. So I really appreciate that. So.
Is there any other questions? Because I do want to ask you questions, but I want to let you ask all your questions.
I think that's my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Isn't that a conflict of will?
Yeah. So
You think it's a conflict of wills?
Yeah.
Is it?
Because you can't be forsaken if you have the same will.
No, that doesn't follow. Christ in his humanity is giving out a cry of anguish. Again.
Questioning his will.
No. It is a cry of anguish to a man who's dying on the cross. Lots of good Christians cry out similar things. It doesn't mean that they've stopped being Christian. It's just a human expression of pain. Sure. But even when Christ cries out in pain, he still points us towards something. Have you read Psalm 22? Have you read Psalm 22?
Maybe at some point back.
Have you read Psalm 22?
Comes from Psalm 22 as well.
Yeah.
22:2.
Psalm 20. Sorry, thank you, Carl. Yes, please.
The Bible just, as the New Testament
Because
quoted Psalm 22.
Bro,
if you bear,
yeah. So Christ is pointing back to a prophecy that predates him by hundreds of years. These are the Psalms of David. Yeah. These were written around 9th, 10th century, so 1,000 years before Christ. Yeah. Even before crucifixion was invented. Listen to this description.
But there's also some psalms in there that are messianic.
Sorry, let's actually just deal with this psalm before we jump around. Yeah. It says, and I'm just going to cut to the chase. Yeah. They open wide their mouths at me as ravening and roaring lions. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaves to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. A band of evildoers have encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet.
I think in the original Hebrew, though, there's a bit of questioning about the
No,
interpretation.
there isn't. This is the Septuagint, which was translated... One second. The Septuagint was translated 200 years before Christ. Yeah. What you're talking about is the Masoretic text, and the Masoretic text is after Christ.
The one where it says bound by my hands and feet.
No, it doesn't say bound. It says that lions have opened wide my hands and my feet. But that's the Masoretic text, and it is after Christ. I'm actually using a Jewish document, the Septuagint, translated by Jews 200 years before Jesus, and they say, pierced my hands and my feet. Now tell me, that description is a description of crucifixion. It's not a coincidence that whilst Christ cries out in anguish and pain, Eloi, Eloi, sabachthani, my God, why have you abandoned me? That he's quoting a very psalm that prophesies a crucifixion.
I just want to, I'm not sure which psalm it is, but I'm not sure how you can reconcile, because there's another messianic psalm, a few messianic psalms that talk about God saving him.
Can you deal with this one first?
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll go on to that.
But,
can you deal with this one first? We have a prophecy that talks about Christ being crucified, the Messiah being crucified.
But, according to my previous understanding, it was like the lion one you mentioned, and I also
I've already told you
one.
That's the Masoretic text. It was after Christ. I'm using the Septuagint, which is earlier than the Masoretic text.
I think there is one where it talks about being bound by your hands.
No, what it says is lions have opened wide my hands and my feet, or lions have bit into my hands and my feet, or they have dug their claws into my hands and my feet. That's the Masoretic.
I think there's another one. I'm not sure, but I feel like there's another one.
That might just be a different translation. Because if I bind something with nails, I've still bound it. But it says.
But then think of Isaiah 53. But I think that still is just pierced my transgression.
Yeah.
Is that the word you were thinking of? But I think that's still the same.
But I want you to deal with this. Christ is appealing to a prophecy. Eloi, Eloi, sabachthani is a prophecy of a crucified Messiah. Now let me ask you this question. We know that Christ... Would you agree with me that if we have an event in history and Group A says X happened in history and Group B says Y happened in history, both of those statements can't both be true. One of them has to be wrong. Now, if we have two groups that say X and Y about the same event in history, how would we go about ascertaining who's telling the truth and who's telling a lie?
The one where God is speaking himself.
The one where God is speaking himself. Okay. So you're saying that we're not going to do any investigation.
No.
So the next time that there's a court case and two people are disputing about what happened in history, you're going to say, what did God say, as a way of finding out the truth?
No, but I mean, if we have access to the fact that God said that, we're going to take that as overriding any historical evidence, right?
Right, so you admit that without that knowledge, without that word... Now, what happens if two people say God said this in history?
I mean, if one of them we can prove...
Yes, how would you prove it?
By like examining the evidence of whether God did
Brilliant,
say that.
brilliant. Examining the evidence. So we have two gods. We have Yahweh, who says his Messiah was crucified, and we have Muhammad's God that says Christ was not crucified. How do we find out which God is telling the truth?
By examining the evidence.
By examining the evidence of both. Would you agree that it's a statement about history? Is it a statement about history to say Jesus wasn't crucified?
Not necessarily. Oh, what do you mean? Sorry.
Is it a statement about history to say Jesus wasn't crucified?
I mean, if there's a divine interception in that moment...
I'm just asking you if it's a historical statement.
Yeah.
Is it?
I mean...
Is it? It's just an historical statement. Jesus was not crucified. Have I made a statement about history?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So when it comes to examination of history, it's fair to say that this is a historical question. We can apply historical methods of finding out what happened, right? Like we would about Muhammad's life. Right. Brilliant. So, the Gospels are earlier than the Quran, correct?
Yeah.
The Gospels were written.
The
Gospels were written within the time, within the sort of generation of Christ.
I don't necessarily believe that.
Okay, fair enough. When do you think they were written?
I feel like they were written a couple generations after, probably. Because the earliest manuscript we have, I feel, of the New Testament, I think it's in Manchester.
Yep.
And it's the fragment of the Gospel of John. And
Yep.
that was, I think, carbon dated to...
No, they didn't carbon date it.
120.
Yeah, 1 to 120, which means that is either an original or it is a early copy of an original by a generation or two.
There's nothing in that statement, in that section, because I've visited it.
Yeah.
There's nothing in there that contradicts the Quran.
No, but hold on. The fact of the matter is, what that demonstrates is that there was a literature called the Gospel of John, a literature that has been copied, that is within that generation. It's within that time. It's kind of like, because for it to be a copy means like 1 or 2 copies back. Scholars attest that it is around 90 AD that the Gospel of John was written.
Okay.
Would you agree that's a lot closer than the Quran?
I don't, because you can't really compare the traditions, because one's more oral based and one's more like...
Are you saying that the Quran existed in the 1st century?
Oh no! Oh, sorry, I thought you meant something else. Oh yeah.
So
no, I mean.
So which is closer to the time?
Created.
Which is closer to the time? The Quran or the Bible? The New Testament, the Gospels?
In my belief system, the Quran is like uncreated, the uncreated word of God, so it's always been there. But, I mean, in terms of what you're trying to say.
that creates a problem, but I'm not going to get off the crucifixion just yet. We've got that the Gospels were there at the time. The Quran was not there at the time.
Yeah.
Right. We've got that the Gospels are attesting to the crucifixion. Agreed?
Yeah. The point of the revelation of the Quran is to, like, one of the reasons
Bro,
is to clarify.
I'm making a really simple historical argument. Like, you can come up with what... I'm just asking you to tell... If I'm saying something that is logically flawed, point it out at the time.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Right. Is it correct to say that the Gospels were written before the Quran?
Yeah.
Is it correct to say that the Gospels were written around the lifetime of Jesus?
That's where I like deal.
So when were they written?
I thought like the earliest part of the New Testament is like the letters of Paul.
It is.
Yeah.
And they were written. For instance, 1 Corinthians 15 was written within 10 years of Christ's crucifixion. Have you got anything that close to the crucifixion?
I mean, we have chains of transmission, so
that go back to Jesus' time.
I think there's like...
So you've got a narration about Jesus not being crucified that goes back to Jesus' time. You can show me all the links in that chain.
No, I can't.
So I'll ask you again.
I don't know.
So we have Paul's letters that talk about the crucifixion of Jesus that were written within 10 years of the actual event. Do you have anything that close?
What I'm saying is...
It's a really simple question, bro. Do you have anything that
at
close?
the moment, I can't say no. I can't say I do. Yeah.
You know what the real answer there is? The real answer is no, you don't. Like we both know the Quran was written in the 7th century. That's 600 years later. So I don't know why you're equivocating over this.
But the reason...
I'm not asking you, I'm just asking you to answer really simple, logical questions. So I'll ask you again. The letter of Paul was written within 10 years of the crucifixion event. Do you have anything that close?
I'm not saying it's written within 10 years, but I agree that I don't have anything that close to the whole thing.
Right. So it's nothing that close. Do you agree that the Gospels and the letters of Paul were written independently of one another?
I can't.
So Paul didn't write the Gospel of John?
Yeah, I agree to that.
You agree to that?
I don't agree.
Do you agree that Paul didn't write the Gospel of Mark?
I don't agree that John wrote the Gospel of John.
That's fine. For the sake of argument, I'll agree with you. John didn't write the Gospel of John.
Okay.
But do you agree that Paul didn't write the Gospel of John?
Like, yeah.
Do you agree that Paul didn't write the Gospel of Mark?
Yeah. I mean,
Do you agree that the author of Mark and the author of John are not the same person, whoever that person is?
Yeah.
Right, so we have early and independent attestations to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ.
There's a lot of like...
Early and independent. Why is that? Do you understand why that's important?
I can see you. Yeah,
Tell everyone why that is important.
Okay, yeah. Because you're basically saying like because there's multiple sources and they're saying the same thing.
Yep.
But there also is like there has been additions in regards to the whole resurrection.
That's fine. Let's pretend there is. Yeah. Let's just pretend there is. Let's just pretend there is. We're talking about the crucifixion right now.
Yeah.
Right. For the sake of argument, the resurrection was made up later. Just talking about the crucifixion right now. So we have multiple attestations that are independent of one another that all say Jesus was crucified. Now, you and I both know that if there was a fight in this park and the police came, they'd start asking different people, what happened, yeah? And they'd try to discern the truth by looking at the various different video clips and listening to different people's stories. So what they would do is they would sift the evidence for that kernel of truth. Agreed? And you're saying, and you would do the same in just about every other situation when you're dealing with something to do with a past that's controversial, right?
Well, I would say like, say there is something like current.
I just want you to answer mine.
I understand.
Would you do the same?
Yeah, I understand.
So why, when it comes to the crucifixion of Jesus, do you not do the same?
Okay, so current historical evidence, let's say, says that Adam doesn't exist, that there wasn't someone called Adam, but Christian belief says that there was someone called Adam.
I'm a Christian.
So you're going against...
I don't believe that Adam was a real person. I'm a Christian. I don't believe that Adam was a real person.
What's your interpretation of it then?
We're not talking about Adam, we're talking about the crucifixion.
No, but I'm giving an example where you would have the same
but
viewpoint as me.
Clearly we don't, so we're talking about the crucifixion, let's deal with the crucifixion.
Yeah. So in this specific instance, I take the word of God, which I assume is the word of God, over any historical evidence, because it's the word of God, and God is the highest source of evidence.
Alright, so let's, since you're not going to deal with my argument, let's go on to the Quran.
No, I'll deal with it. Okay, so possibly, according to current historical understanding, the crucifixion is more likely scenario or whatever.
Right, which means that the Quran is making a statement that is contradicted by all the available evidence, right?
I don't know enough about the crucifixion to say all the available evidence.
Well, all the available evidence says that Christ was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Show me any evidence that says otherwise.
I mean, I'll have to look into it.
You'll say the Quran, right?
Yeah.
But the Quran does not count as evidence because it wasn't there, it wasn't written by an eyewitness, it wasn't there at the time, it's written in a different language in a foreign land hundreds of years later. Okay, motivated by a man whose reason for arguing otherwise is because he couldn't accept that a prophet of God would be crucified.
What I'm saying is there is circumstances where the Christian viewpoint doesn't agree with the historical evidence, but you still take the Christian viewpoint because it's the word of God according to you, right? There has to be
well, yeah, we've got the historical construct about Israel conquering the land of Palestine.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm not one of these biblical fundamentalists who say that I have to believe literally in every part of the Bible as written. That's not how I understand the Christian faith. Okay. But let's come on to the Quran because it's relevant back to the incarnation again. Yeah? Are they still picking us up? Yeah. So back to the... No, you're really not. You're really not. And I appreciate talking to you because you sound sincere and you sound genuine. And actually, I come to the park to speak to people like you, not that guy. So coming back to the Quran, you would say that the Quran is eternal.
Yeah, according to
So it shares in the divine attribute of eternality, right? Right. Do you, when you say the Quran, do you say that the book Quran?
No.
What are you saying is sharing in the speech of Allah? Right. Is eternal? Yes. Okay. Now, who brought that speech to Muhammad?
the angel gave it.
So he had to receive it, right? He had to He had to hold it within himself to bring it to Muhammad.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
So
there might
that-
be some hadith.
So that means that an angel carries the eternal word of Allah within himself.
No, it's just transmitting.
It's just transmitting.
Yeah, it's
So these words then are not the words of Allah.
No, I
It's
mean,
not the
I
speech of Allah.
I can transmit it to you, for example. But
Is it created or uncreated at that point?
like, it's created.
It's created.
The
So-
actual concept.
so the-
like the number one, for example, I can write the number one, and that's created, right?
Yep.
But the actual concept of the number one is uncreated.
Are you saying numbers are uncreated?
I mean, that was just an example.
But that is what you just said. I thought only Allah was uncreated. So I'm giving it from your-
is
a number uncreated? Numbers are created as far as I'm concerned. So are words created?
No, I mean, when in creation they're created.
Yeah.
But independent of creation, they're not created.
Okay. So coming back to this speech of Allah, this it says that there are, if I understand it correctly, within Islamic tradition there are eternal tablets, stone tablets in heaven. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're tablets in heaven.
Tablets in
I
heaven.
think-
Are these tablets?
don't wanna comment.
Are these tablets created or uncreated?
I actually don't know that specifically. But I can get back to you on that specifically. I think
My
because I
point
think
is-
they were written. So.
My point is.
But there is
So they were created?
But there's no. I'm talking about the Quran. That has always the whole concept of the Quran in heaven.
The concept or the actual
Yeah.
words? Do the words of the Quran or the words of the Quran eternal? In other words, is the speech of Iblis that is recorded in the Quran eternal or not?
In some way, shape, or form, but it could be different to our reality.
So what we've got, right, if the Quran is eternal, then that means it is eternally recorded the speech of Iblis, which means that the words of Iblis are also eternal. Do you believe that the words of Iblis are eternal?
no.
But yet the Quran quotes Iblis.
It's quoting like something like in the future because Iblis was created, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But those words are eternal. Are they Allah's words or are they Iblis's words? So Iblis is speaking the word of Allah.
But you can talk about a situation in the future where. Do you see what I'm saying?
You're saying it's what, prophecy?
Yeah.
But my point to you is, if those are actually the words of Iblis, then that means that Iblis's words are eternal. If they're actually the words of Allah, then that means that Iblis is speaking the word of Allah.
But that's like saying, okay.
Do you believe that Iblis was speaking the words of Allah at
No,
that
I'm
point?
saying that's words. Like you can let's say there's a hypothetical character I create in the future, and I say that character says this. That's not necessarily his words. Do you see what I'm saying?
But that's what I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Are these the words of Allah or the words of Iblis?
I mean, according to my current understanding, it's the words of Allah that he's like attributing.
So
to
Iblis spoke those words of Allah. So he didn't speak the words of Allah. So these are the words of Iblis then.
It's like I don't really see.
My point is, if you're saying that the Quran is eternal, then everything that's recorded in the Quran is also eternal.
Yeah.
That's a problem because there's speech of created things in the Quran.
Yeah, but those created things don't necessarily have to be created for there to be speech recording an uncreated thing.
So my
That's
point.
not my point.
So my point to you is that in terms of the attributes of Allah, Allah's attributes enter into creation according to Islamic doctrine. Because Allah is either, Iblis is either speaking the words of Allah, or he's speaking his own words. If he's speaking his own words, those words are eternally the words of Iblis. If he's speaking the words of Allah, then Allah's words have entered creation.
I believe the second statement, but I don't believe that they've entered creation. Because I don't see how you make that link.
Because those words are eternal, right? Are they eternal or not?
Okay, yeah. But those words by Allah are not the same as the words of Iblis.
But they are.
He's like quoting.
So does Allah misquote Iblis? So Iblis said something different. So Iblis did say those words.
Iblis saying it is not the same as when God says it.
Do you believe that these accounts? Do you believe that this book is perfect? Not this translation, the Arabic.
The Arabic.
Right. So when Allah is talking about the dialogue, have you ever compared the dialogue of what happened between Allah and Iblis in the Quran?
I've seen it.
Yeah. Have you ever put them side by side to one another, synoptically? Right. It's interesting if you do, because they actually give different accounts of the same event. Yeah. Do you want to look at that? Yeah. Have you got a Quran?
I think I might have. So, sorry, this is just while you guys search it up. I was just wondering, do you believe Muslims worship the same God as
No.
Christians?
No, I don't.
So you believe we're committing paganism?
No, actually, I was just saying that to that guy because he keeps calling me
So you don't believe Islam is pagan?
Do I believe that Islam is pagan? No. I don't believe it's a true religion, but no, I don't believe it's pagan. Because pagans believe in pantheism, and I know that Muslims aren't pantheists. But I think it's a cheap shot.
From my perspective, Christianity is pantheist.
Wait, why do you think that Christianity is pantheist?
I mean, I know you gave like quite a good explanation.
If you go to Surah 2, ayah 30 to 39, and I'm going to go to Surah 7. Go on.
I know you gave quite a good explanation, and I'll have to like review it. I mean, there's a video going up.
Yeah, this video will go.
I'll look at it like once more to like try and fully grasp it. But I still believe the whole attributes thing about if God can limit his attributes. Like,
you mean like Allah does when he's not merciful?
I mean, I am.
Let's go back to that one. No, let's go back to that one. I want to drill that home because I'm not having you walk out of this park thinking that we're doing something wrong. Allah is merciful, right? Who is he merciful to before creation?
Just of him. Like before creation, he had the intention of creating creation, and surely that's a merciful thing.
No. My question to you, that's an aspect of knowledge. Who is he merciful to? Because mercy is a transaction. You know the quickest way to disprove my argument? Give me an example of mercy that isn't a transaction.
Just the fact that he's created so much beauty in nature.
Creation is a transaction. Give me another one. Okay, can I just deal with this brother's one question? Don't run away. I want to finish our conversation. One quick question. Yeah.
I'll give his name. I've heard you say you're calling the Christians for martyrdom.
Yes.
Against who?
Christians should be willing to die as martyrs for Christ. Yes, for Christ's sake. No Christian will disagree with me. Why? We should be willing to sacrifice our lives for Jesus.
And you said after that, you said prison, even prison.
Yes, Christians should be willing to go for prison.
So done killing.
Did I say killing?
Huh?
Did I say killing?
Sound like...
That's just your interpretation,
What's the
bro.
martyrdom?
Martyrdom is dying for what you believe in. It's a witness.
It's not going to fight or...
A true Christian is willing to die for his faith. Full stop.
How?
So,
If someone kills me, I'm willing to die for my faith. There you go, you see? You got it. Well done.
But what are you going to do? You're going to kill other people?
It depends on the circumstances.
you go.
Depend on the
I tell you what,
circumstances.
if a Muslim said that, he would be in prison by now.
No, brother. If someone tried to stab you right now, I would fight to defend you. And if I fought to defend you in the only way I could defend you and me is to kill the other person, that's what I would do.
Go back to the video. And you will see.
That's just your own interpretation, bro. Anyway, I've answered your question. Thank you so much.
Dangerous for this
I don't believe in wimpy Christianity.
You are dangerous.
I don't believe in
You
wimpy
are
Christianity.
You're dangerous, you know that.
What, because I believe Christians should die as
It's
martyrs?
not for me or for other people.
Carl,
you know what?
Carl, you're Christian?
Listen,
Yes.
listen.
Do you believe Christians should die as martyrs?
I'm worried about the children.
If the circumstance calls it, yes.
Yeah, I'm worried about
Find
the
me,
children.
find me a
around you.
Christian. Find me a Christian that doesn't believe in martyrdom.
Okay.
Find me one. Go find me one.
I'm worried about
Go
the
find me a
children.
Christian that doesn't believe in martyrdom.
Listen, no,
Go find me one.
Listen.
All right. Anyway, I'm going to go back to my conversation
Yeah,
now.
go
I
on.
answered your question.
Yeah.
Right. So
You're
my
lucky
question
you're
to
not in
you.
prison.
Yeah.
My question to you is this. My question to you is this. Allah is unable to be merciful until there is someone to be merciful to, because mercy is a transaction. That doesn't mean that it's not within his character, it's not within his content. But what that does mean is that attribute is not in operation. Another example is one of the attributes of Allah that He is the creator.
Yeah.
Is creation eternal? So there was a point when Allah was not the creator.
I don't want to comment on that. 'Cause
No, I'm asking you to comment.
Sorry?
I'm asking you to
No,
comment.
but I don't want to, I don't want to go against...
Is Allah
scholars.
always a creator?
Yeah,
He's always a creator. So that means that creation must be eternal. Otherwise, what is Allah creating? Himself? Does Allah create himself?
There's a possibility that there was creation before this creation.
One second.
So he's always creating.
One second. If Allah is always the creator, what is He creating? His own thoughts? What aspect of Allah is being created by Allah?
Possibly that.
So you're saying that Allah creates Himself? No, you're not saying that. So let's ask a question. Again, it says that Allah is a creator. Who? What is He creating? Thank you.
I'm not too familiar with that aspect.
Hold it over the guest.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Too familiar with that.
Right. My point is this. We both know that Allah has the potential to create. We both know that Allah has the ability to be merciful. Not disputing that. What I'm pointing out is that those attributes are not in operation until Allah actually creates something that He can be merciful to.
Okay, so you're not arguing. You're just.
I'm
giving
not
an example.
arguing.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not arguing
No, I
that
get
Allah
it.
is not a creator
Yeah.
and that Allah is not merciful. I'm arguing that those attributes are not in
on
operation,
hold, basically.
and they're on hold. Exactly. So when God enters into His creation in the Son, takes on the fullness of humanity, His knowledge is not fully in operation. You have the same idea in your beliefs.
I agree.
Therefore, it's not a problem in ours.
I understand, but I'm saying just that the fact that his knowledge is not in operation is quite dangerous if he's on Earth, because that could mean that he could forget that he's God.
Yeah, but could have, would have, could have. The fact
But how
is,
do we know?
The fact is, he didn't.
But I mean, he could be here right now as God, but he's just forgotten.
This is just a hypothetical.
Yeah, hypothetical.
All right,
means it's a possibility, right?
Let's just deal with it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the reality is that within Islam, you have this idea that Allah doesn't operate in all of His attributes.
I mean, I'll go along.
Right. Well, no, that is. Tell me if I'm wrong. Show me my logic is wrong.
Sure.
Is my logic wrong? My logic is sound, right? Now, that means, therefore, that the attributes of Allah are dependent on creation. Agreed? Logically?
I think I personally have view that they're not dependent. But
Right, so who is He merciful to before creation, and how is He a creator before creation?
I need to come back.
Well, no, I'm sorry, but you're not going to throw hard questions at Christians and not expect some hard questions
No, I
back.
mean, I just had those questions.
Right, but let me ask you this. Doesn't He
I don't know
also
the
say that
questions.
one of the attributes of Allah is that He's all-sufficient? Well, if Allah is all-sufficient, how is it that He needs creation to be the creator and He needs
We
someone
don't
to be
fully
merciful?
grasp these attributes of God.
Oh, right, so you're saying that they can exist in a way without our full understanding. So we can say the same about the incarnation then, can't we? We can accept the incarnation
The thing-
along those
The
lines.
issue is the incarnation is in this creation, whereas these attributes are outside the creation.
But they are dependent on creation.
No, but I mean, if they're out, the incarnation is happening in creation.
Yeah,
like
but
in
the point is,
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, if it is acceptable for you to believe that God is the creator before he's created anything, and he's merciful before he has anyone to be merciful to, whether that's a thing or a person, and you just say, well, we accept it as a mystery, then there's nothing wrong with Christians saying the same, and there's nothing wrong with you accepting the incarnation in the same way. So my point to you is that you don't have a reason not to accept the incarnation along this line of argument.
Okay.
That is not a reason not to accept the incarnation. If you can accept mystery, we can accept mystery. And if you can accept, I can accept the mystery about your God. What I can't accept are Muslims creating double standards where they have one standard for their own religion and another standard for my religion.
No, but,
I'm not saying you're doing that. That's why I'm just saying I can't accept that.
okay.
But you haven't got a reason not to accept the incarnation.
I feel like they're slightly different because one's happening in creation, one's not happening in creation.
Right, so let's look at this. One is not happening in creation.
Yeah.
Allah is a creator, right?
Allah's attributes are independent of creation, whereas
Right.
this incarnation is happening in creation.
Then your concept of God is illogical. Because you're saying, so I'll show you why it's illogical.
Sorry, I'm
Allah is a creator, right?
Yeah.
Who is a creator to before creation? Can God pick up a rock? Can God create a rock that he can't pick up?
It's below His Majesty to do that.
No, that's a catchphrase. Deal with the question. Can God
it's not-
create a rock that he can't pick up?
But it doesn't befit His Majesty to do that. So.
No. This is the
It's a
question.
yes or no.
The question
No, but
is.
how would you answer it?
The question is illogical. The question makes no rational sense. It is an irrational statement to say that God creates a rock he can't pick up. That's an irrational statement. But it is also an irrational statement to say that Allah is created before he created. Now, we Christians have the same question, but we deal with it with a more sophisticated theology. Gregory of Palamas, who's another church father you should read, so that's two church fathers, Maximus the Confessor and Gregory of Palamas, speaks about the uncreated energies of God that have a moment of time from which they operate. So God as creator is an energy of God, and it begins at the moment he creates. God as merciful is an energy of God. It begins at the moment he is merciful. So it has a beginning in time, but it is an energy that is eternal.
Okay.
Now, don't rip off Christians' answers because the Quran says that you're not to be like the unbelievers. You're not like to be the kuffar.
No, I mean,
the Quran says you shouldn't copy me. So now let me ask you the same question.
I didn't agree with what you said. I just accepted it as.
Right. So now let me ask you the question.
Okay.
Who was God the creator to before he created?
I'm saying like.
Why can't you comment?
Because, like,
Does the Quran describe God as creator? Does it say those attributes are eternal?
yes.
So is it fair for me to conclude that Allah was always the creator?
No, because like.
No. So these are not eternal attributes.
You can like.
Are these eternal attributes or not? Right, if they're eternal, then I can conclude logically, and show me where my logic is wrong, that Allah has always been the creator. Correct? And what is the act of being a creator? It's to create, correct? Which means that creation itself has always been an eternal thing, right?
No, because there could have been creation before.
Exactly. So yeah, but even then, that means that there was the infinite regression of creation is the only way you're going to get around this conundrum. But that means that creation is also eternal, and that it is in a symbiotic relationship with its creator.
I'm talking about like outside of creation, the whole concept of time is different to what we have here. So
I agree.
yeah, so we can't like. These concepts are really hard to fathom in creation. Because we can't fathom something that's not creation. That's why God says it like.
But it says that Allah
so
is a
different
creator.
from everything. Yeah, but it also says that there's nothing like Him.
I know. This is problems. You got problems, bro. Your theology as a Muslim makes no rational sense. And the reason why it makes no rational sense is because the man that made it up and the people that developed it were not receiving inspiration from God. Well, they weren't. Or otherwise they wouldn't come out with statements like, God is a creator even before creation. God was merciful even before there was someone to be merciful to, which is exactly what you believe as a Muslim. And that is like saying that God creates a rock that he can't pick up.
If there was, like, say, the first creation and it continuously creates from that point, it's still eternally the creator, right?
What, sorry?
If there was a point where there was the first creation, right? The point where there was the first creation,
yeah,
and then he eternally creates from that point onwards.
Yeah,
he is eternally the creator, right?
No, because there was a point before that at which he didn't create.
The whole.
If we have a beginning of time, then that means there is a point before time. The attributes are eternal. Bro, can we just be honest? The reason why you're struggling is because you're defending irrationality and you're a rational human being. Your rationality is telling you that this is nonsense, but the fact that you're a Muslim is telling you that you have to defend it.
I thought you said the incarnation is a similar situation to this.
No, I'm just saying that I could appeal to a similar kind of answer. And I'm saying that if it works for you, you have no objection if it works for me. Okay. And therefore you have no reason not to accept it. But if you're going to argue...
I'm not going to argue.
But if you're going to make the argument, well, I can't become a Christian because I can't believe that God will have limits on his knowledge by virtue of his humanity, then you have a problem yourself. Because your belief in God is irrational. At least we have a rational explanation. We're saying that by virtue of his humanity, there is certain knowledge that is present, it's not gone away, it's not been destroyed, it's not been changed, it's actually there in the person of Christ, it's just not accessible to him by virtue of his humanity. Can we come back to the...
Yeah, sure.
Right, so I've got
Surah 2, verse, is it 30 to 38?
I've got Surah 11. Like, if it gets really rainy, do you want to go inside for a coffee?
Yeah, sure.
Like, we'll go to a coffee shop and continue. Yeah? So, I've got Surah Surah 7, Ayah 11 to 25. Right.
So this issue is to do with these...
Sorry, what was this again?
So this is to do with, like... So we're talking about the Quran being the eternal words.
Yeah. And a perfect book.
And a perfect book. And there are words in the Quran which Iblis says.
Sorry, are you aware of the Mutazilites?
Yeah.
Do you feel the current Islamic version is better than that?
I think the Mutazilites had a more rational understanding of God than Hanbalis. I think the Mutazilites saying that the Quran was not eternal was a far more rational position.
I feel the Mutazilites were going down the route that Renaissance Christianity has gone down, like where logic is appealing more, like your logic is greater than the scripture, and when you interpret the scripture, it's through your lens of logic rather than the actual scripture itself.
Right, well, let's just deal with the scripture then. So here is two accounts of the same event.
Okay.
Would you agree if two accounts are different, they can't both be right?
Not necessarily.
Well, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to read Surah 7, starting from verse 11, and we'll do it verse by verse.
Okay.
Until we get...
So where do I start?
Well, you start from Surah 2, verse 30 to 39.
Okay, right.
It is we who created you and gave you shape, then we bade... Yeah, just pointing out that shape there, according to the Quran, is a created thing.
That's...
Anyway, moving on. Then we bade the angels bow down to Adam, which is shirk, and they bowed down, not so Iblis, who he refused to be of those who bow down. Do you want to read your first verse?
So is this when we told the angels bow down before Adam?
Just read it, just read it from that.
Okay. When we told the angels bow down before Adam, they all bowed, but not Iblis, who refused and was arrogant. He was disobedient.
Allah said, what prevented thee from bowing down when I commanded thee? He said, I am better than he. Thou didst create me from fire and him from clay.
We said, Adam, live with your wife in this garden. Both of you eat freely there as you will, but do not go near this tree, or you will both become wrongdoers.
Would you agree that there's a chronological difference there?
So this one is saying...
This is one where Allah says, bow down to the angels. Yeah? And Allah is saying...
No, bow down to the angels?
Allah said to the... What prevented thee bowing down to Iblis? when I commanded thee, he said, I am, and then Iblis says, I am better than he. Thou didst create me from fire and him from clay. But in this surah it says,
so we're going.
just read the verse, bro.
Yeah. Bowed, when we told the angels bow down before Adam, they all bowed, but not Iblis, who refused and was arrogant.
And then what did Allah say?
He was disobedient. Adam, live with your wife in this garden.
Right. So would you agree that there is at least a chronological difference here? We're gonna go inside, bro.
Yeah.
It's too rainy, so we're gonna continue this conversation in a coffee shop.
We're not able to film inside the coffee. Actually funny.
Yeah.
I tell you what, so wrap up whatever, like this point, wrap it up here, and then you can carry on.
Well, we literally just moved on to a new point. So we literally just moved on to a new point.
Yeah. So this point, carry on.
So okay.
You know why? Because they're not gonna allow us to film.
Okay, get to the words that Iblis says. When Iblis responds to Allah.
I'm not quite sure exactly you said the right. Where's the bit which?
Surah, you're reading Ayah 2, 30 to 39.
One of them's an accelerated. From what my understanding was, one of them's an accelerated timeline. One's not.
It's not just an accelerated timeline; it's different words.
Prophet, when your Lord told the angels, "I'm putting a successor on earth," he said, "How can you put someone there who will cause damage and bloodshed?"
It's all right. I'll get to it.
Yeah, maybe you can.
Surah 2, 30 to 39. Right.
I can't find anything.
So here it
that
is.
says. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you ready? Then did Satan make them? Hold on. Do you know what? You're right. I did give you the wrong place. You're looking for 38. Let's go into a cafe. Let's go into a cafe. Sorry, guys. JC, I'm going to do a quick wrap up.
Okay.
I'll just do a quick wrap up of what we talked about, and then we'll go in and we'll do this.
Brother, please hold it to me.
Sure.
So,
Wrap up.
what I wanted to demonstrate is that Muslims have no legitimate objection to the incarnation. Their arguments about Christ not having full knowledge demonstrates the fact that Muslims have not taken the time to understand what Christians believe. Christians believe that the one person of Christ has two natures and operates out of those two natures. And that within the operation of the human nature, the divine nature is fully present, but it is, as it were, constrained within the human nature. Likewise, Muslims also believe that Allah's attributes are constrained. Who was Allah creating before creation? But he is considered to be creator. That's one of his divine attributes, and it's eternal. Who was he merciful to before there was someone to be merciful to? That's an eternal attribute. But these kinds of statements saying that Allah is always eternal, eternally merciful, and he's always eternally the creator are irrational statements. They're like saying that God can create a rock that he can't pick up. It is irrational beliefs, and that's why Muslims can't defend it. But yet those same Muslims will try to criticize the Christian faith, saying that it's irrational. Yet there is nothing irrational by saying that the full knowledge of God was present in the person of Jesus Christ, but by virtue of his humanity was not completely successful. Sorry, not successful, not completely accessible. The reality is that God always defines the limits of our knowledge, and he did so at his own incarnation.